Chair lays out HB 2652 and recognizes Representative Larson to explain his bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2652 creates an advisory board to study surface water and groundwater interaction, consisting of appointees representing the Water Development Board, TCEQ, river authorities, groundwater districts, academia, the House Chair of the Natural Resources Committee, and the Chair of the Senate Water and Rural Affairs Committee, and the Office of the Governor. The creation of an advisory board will provide a forum for meaningful study and development of policy solutions to guide the legislature forward on this issue. This is a very complicated issue, very contentious, and I bring this forward for a couple of reasons. The state of Texas has spent tens of millions of dollars in a lawsuit against the state of New Mexico, and it's addressing this issue, conjunctive use of water. What the state engineer of New Mexico did was allowed 3,000 permits along the Rio Grande to farmers. As they drilled into the groundwater, they were supplanting the water that was flowing into the river. And at the end of the river, or through this process, they were able to dilute the amount of water that was available for the folks in El Paso with the reservoir Elephant Butte. It's funny that we're spending literally tens of millions of dollars fighting a state adjacent to us, and we don't recognize this in our own state law. And so this brings it forward to stop the hypocrisy. We need to address this. We had a series of hearings over the last decade on this committee to go out and look at different areas that are impacted. So farmers or operators put in wells, and then we see that in the adjacent basin that we have less water available. There was a study done by the Southwest Research folks to show that there's 30% of the water at the surface water is groundwater. And that was a snapshot study. We think it's probably much more profound than that. In the Devil's River, the same thing. Groundwater pumping reduces the amount of water that's available. San Saba, we went to Mason and we went to Brady, and we talked to folks that were impacted there. You had pecan farmers, you had folks growing hay. They turned on the pumps, the river dried up. And so somewhere we got to get to this position. In the hill country, we see it as wells are put in, the springs dry up, the creeks dry up, and then all that water that's supposed to flow to the tributaries into these basins, it's not available. And so we have two different regulatory frameworks, one for groundwater, one for surface water. I think this bill would start the discussion. By no means do I think it's going to be an easy process, because people have dug in on how we deal with groundwater and how we deal with surface water. Long-term impacts, we see the next significant drought. This is where all the litigation is going to be based. And so we can preempt it by addressing the issue, by having a discussion, have all the stakeholders at the table, and develop a process to have a single regulatory process for all of water in Texas instead of having the two. And I can feel the hair rising on the back of the necks and the people that are sitting behind me, because it's a very difficult issue. We're spending, if it's good enough for us in the Supreme Court of the United States, it should be good enough for the legislature to address the very difficult issue. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll answer any questions.
Mr. Chairman, or Representative Larson, do you have a substitute?
We do.
Okay. The chair offers a committee substitute and recognizes Representative Larson to explain the.
Yeah, the committee substitute simply adds 3 new members. The board consisted of 9 on the original bill. It goes to 12. We got a couple on the river authorities. We got a couple, instead of 1, we go 2 on the river authorities. Instead of 1, we go to 2 on the groundwater districts, and we have folks that represent the environmental community would be put on it. And those are the 3 additional folks.
Thank you, Representative Larson. Members, any questions? Representative Paul.
Yeah, Representative Larson, does the governor appoint these other ones? I mean, you mentioned the chairman of the committee in the House and Senate, but the others appointed by the governor?
Yes, the office of the governor has also an appointee.
Then this board, this is something that's going to be a permanent structure that would come over there, and but it's a permanent thing, but its process, its charge will be just to evaluate this situation. No control over anybody else, but it's an evaluation of what this problem that you've identified is.
You know, that's one thing I really like about you, Representative Paul, your optimism. I like that. And yes, it would just start a conversation. And we'd get all of the folks, hopefully all the stakeholders and all of the folks from the state regulatory agencies sit down and start having this discussion.
And then the study that you mentioned about evaluating what this would be gone, does this, I guess you're not providing monies for these studies, is it? But is this something that they're going to be trying to get that data?
The folks with the Water Development Board and TCQ have indicated that they can do it with existing staff. The issue of what it would cost us to get outside resources to start doing the analysis is about $300,000. And so there will be a fiscal note attached to this. They're going to have hydrologists involved. We're going to have to start studying the basins, where the inflows and the alluviums in the aquifers, you know, the interaction between ground and surface water. Like I said, this is forward thinking. It's an issue that we're sitting in the Supreme Court arguing to a state adjacent to us, but we don't recognize it in state law. We have to address this because this will be the genesis of so many lawsuits if we don't preempt it. You know, people are going to start suing their neighbors. They put a pump in, their spring dries up, or there's a disruption. And this will happen in the next drought, which we might be in right now. We're in an extensive drought across the state right now, and you're going to start seeing springs dry up. People are going to start pointing fingers. And I hope that the state has the fortitude to step up and look at this and be forward thinking instead of being reactive.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Paul. Members, any further questions of Representative Larson? If not, we will proceed to public testimony.
Okay, reserve the right to close.
Thank you. You shall have it. Chair calls Andrew Weir. Please state your name correctly for the record, who you represent, and your position on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. My name is Andrew Weir. I'm a citizen in Bastrop County, and I'm here representing myself and the organization Simsboro Aquifer Water Defense Foundation, SAWDEF. As Representative Larson fondly called us, sawdust. So we are testifying in support of this bill because the more information we have about surface water, groundwater interaction, the better. SAWDEF works with business, government, and the groundwater conservation districts in Milam, Burleson, Lee, and Bastrop counties, representing landowners who have 3,500 exempt domestic livestock or irrigation wells. And we're situated between the Brazos and the Colorado rivers. And so we know about the surface water and groundwater interaction, and we need to be a part of that solution. So we would like to encourage the favorable passage of this bill. And we'd also like to offer our services because of where we are located and because we interact with landowners and the public. We can help this committee to hold a public hearing. That's part of the substitute bill, that they would have at least one public hearing, and we would offer our services to help to convene that and gather people, because you have that interaction between groundwater, surface water with those two river basins and our proximity to Austin. So with that, I answer any questions.
Any questions, members? Thank you, Mr. Weir. Appreciate you being here. Chair calls Steve Box. Mr. Box, please state your name for the record, who you represent, and your position on the bill, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman and Representative Larson and committee members. I am Steve Box, President of Environmental Stewardship. Environmental Stewardship has filed comments and is for the substitute bill to establish an advisory board to study surface water and groundwater interactions. For reasons discussed below, we would recommend that the person representing environmental interests be familiar with the objectives of Environmental Flow Bill, Senate Bill 3, that passed the 80th legislature. We further urge that the legislature, not in this bill particularly, provide funding for such studies as are needed in the state to assist groundwater management areas and groundwater conservation districts. First, it's a pleasure to be able to once again provide testimony to this committee, and especially gratifying to be in agreement with Representative Larson on the need for an advisory board. As Environmental Stewardship's chief advocate for the protection of our state water resources, I have testified before this committee in years past as we started down a now 13-year journey to craft groundwater and surface water legislation, and then to participate in the enactment of that legislation in Bastrop and surrounding counties, Milam, Burleson, Lee. Most recently, I have been a stakeholder in the activities of the actions of Groundwater Management Area 12, as we have reviewed the desired future conditions for the Carrizo-Wilcox aquifer group that includes the highly targeted Simsboro aquifer formation. GMA 12, and like many other groundwater management areas in the state, is desperately in need and is ready for state funding to enable it to do the science needed to better understand, and more importantly, to measure and quantify the relationship between surface waters and groundwaters under its jurisdiction. Once this advisory board is established, I look forward to sharing our experience as a stakeholder to GMA 12 with the board in the hopes that the board will see the wisdom in closing the gap between environmental flow legislation under Senate Bill 3 and groundwater legislation, making it clear to both groundwater districts and river authorities that the protection of environmental flows is a key link to providing for a sound ecological aquatic environment called for in Senate Bill 3. And I will also echo Representative Larson's interests and concerns with the fact that we, as the state of Texas, are in conflict and in the Supreme Court with the state of New Mexico on an issue that we have not yet resolved and faced here in the state of Texas. And I think it is encouraging to hear that there is thought that we might try to reconcile these and bring them together. Finally, to do this work, it is our view that the Basin and Bay Area Stakeholder Committees, the BBASCs, need to be tasked with and funded to provide recommendations to the legislature, TCEQ, and Texas Water Development Board regarding the appropriate means of monitoring the impact of groundwater production on rivers and their tributaries in order to protect environmental flows, especially during drought conditions. Drought conditions is one of the things that seems to be lacking in groundwater regulations. In addition, the BBASCs need funding to task their Bay and Basin area expert science teams to make scientifically based recommendations to that committee so that committee can then make scientifically based and also the political actions that they have within the BBASC to the state. With that, I will close. I urge passage of this, and I will be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Box. Members, any questions? Appreciate you coming this morning.
Thank you.
Chair calls Carlos Rubenstein. Please state your name for the record, who you represent, and your position on the bill. Mr. Rubenstein.
Chairman, members of the committee, for the record, my name is Carlos Rubenstein. I'm principal of RSH2, and I'm here to testify for House Bill 2652. As you've heard this morning already, there has for quite some time, and perhaps far too long, been a recognized need for improvement in the science and understanding to evaluate surface water, groundwater interactions. From a statewide perspective, the proper management of surface water, groundwater interactions is important in regard to water rights along the river, Endangered Species Act compliance, environmental flows consideration, groundwater permitting, and obtaining bed and banks permits. We see groundwater, surface water interaction conflicts in the Rio Grande, Texas versus New Mexico case, on the San Saba, on the Colorado, along the Brazos, and in iconic and threatened Texas water features such as Jacob's Well and Comanche Springs. We have and will see them elsewhere in Texas. Central to this discussion is the question, do we have the right science and understanding to properly quantify these impacts? To be sure, surface water, groundwater interaction issues have been studied in the past, but a review of findings indicates significantly different results. An honest and open discussion is needed to advance towards resolution on this matter. Texas Water Trades, some GCDs, and EDF, among many others, are hard at work on this issue and can serve as a great resource in this much needed effort. Currently, I'm also assisting Belding Farms in assessing these issues. Impacts to Comanche Springs from nearby groundwater pumping are among the key points under review. For all the reasons I have stated, I am pleased to also report that Belding Farms and Cockrell Investment Partners support House Bill 2652. Again, thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Rubenstein. Rubenstein, I'm sorry. Any questions? Thank you, sir. Representative Bowers, did you have a question? I'm sorry.
I did not.
Okay, I'm so sorry.
I think it was declared.
Okay.
You got an icon?
No, it's not.
Well, thank you for recognizing me.
Well, we thank you for being here.
I feel like I'm way old.
It's Vanessa Puig Williams.
Chair calls Vanessa Puig Williams. Please state your name for the record, who you represent, and your position on the bill.
Did it not work?
No, I haven't done it yet.
Hi, good morning. My name is Vanessa Puig Williams, and I'm director of the Texas Water Program for the Environmental Defense Fund. And I'm testifying today in support of House Bill 2652. And we appreciate, Representative Larson, your efforts on this important issue. EDF's work in Texas is focused on ensuring that our water supplies, our communities and ecosystems who depend on these water supplies are resilient to drought. I don't need to tell any of you or anyone really in the state of Texas how vital both economically and ecologically rivers are to this state. We all know this, but what is not so obvious is how vital groundwater is to the flow of rivers in Texas. The Water Development Board estimates that 30% of the water flowing in rivers across Texas originates as groundwater. And during times of drought, virtually all of the water flowing in rivers is groundwater. Despite these hydrological connections, groundwater and surface water are managed separately in Texas. And Texas's framework for managing groundwater allows groundwater levels to decline over time. Even, as Representative Larson explained, when these declines in groundwater levels allow water in our rivers and springs to decrease. Across Texas, the flow of rivers is increasingly impacted by groundwater pumping. This adversely affects landowners' property interests in the groundwater they own and place, and it also impacts the public's interest in surface water, which the state holds in trust. This is an urgent issue that must be addressed. In the future, as parts of Texas become more arid, it is imperative that we have a framework in place to ensure that groundwater is managed to sustain springs and rivers. But I want to point out that we are in a good place. We have a good start in Texas. Chapter 36 of the Water Code requires groundwater conservation districts to consider impacts to surface water resources when evaluating permits or adopting desired future conditions. And groundwater conservation districts have the authority to regulate groundwater production to prevent the reduction of artesian pressure, which is essentially the pressure in an aquifer that keeps springs flowing to the surface. However, many groundwater conservation districts are unable to fully consider or address impacts to surface water caused by groundwater pumping. And a major reason for this is the lack of site-specific data and refined modeling that they need to understand the highly local and complex interactions between groundwater and surface water, and then how to manage to protect these connections. So we need to take a hard look at how we can ensure that groundwater districts have the resources, the tools, and the science to manage groundwater to ensure that springs and rivers continue to flow, and that the considerations Chapter 36 envisions become real considerations. House Bill 2652 is a great first step in getting us there, and we would urge your support, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Appreciate your testimony.
That's it. Or can I jump to the
All
next
right.
one?
No further. Is there anyone else wishing to testify on for or against HB 2652? If not, Chair recognizes Representative Larson to close on this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very complex issue, one that the state of Texas needs to address. With that, I close.
Just a quick question, Representative Larson. You mentioned two things. You mentioned the lawsuit, and familiar with that in my other capacity because we're having to put some money into that lawsuit with New Mexico, and obviously we've expended enormous amount of resources on that lawsuit. Is that your understanding as well?
It is. I think the last recollection I have is over 15 million, and then we keep asking for 5 million just about every session, and it's in front of an intermediary right now. I think a referee's been assigned out of New Orleans to try to address the issue. We will win. You know, we're going to win the lawsuit. All the indications are. But the reality is it's hypocritical, the state of Texas, when we don't recognize conjunctive use, and that's the whole premise of this lawsuit.
Right, and then that leads me to the complexity of this issue, the groundwater versus surface water, and in our region, obviously, we have so much growth and development. You guys hear this all the time, the differences between unincorporated Harris County and incorporated Houston. And obviously the city of Houston has its water source, surface water. They're building a new North Houston treatment plant, I think.
Sure.
But you also have those, and that's 2 million people. The other 2 million people in unincorporated Harris County either live in the mud or in IOU, or they're on water wells and septic tanks, right? And so even within Harris County, there are just different ways of providing water, and I guess your bill, your regime would help us kind of tackle some of these issues that are starting to boil up. Is that your understanding too?
That's the focus, is just have a comprehensive regulatory approach, both ground and surface water, because we disconnect them right now. We have no relationship in the regulatory framework right now of surface water and what the groundwater impacts are. And it's myopic, and I think that it's going to haunt us if we don't get a handle on it. And the next drought will be will show profound reasoning of why we need to address this issue now.
Thank you, Representative Larson. Any further questions? Hearing none, Thank you, Representative
I
Larson.
appreciate it.
Let's see, if there's no objection to chair withdraws the committee substitute. If there's no objection, the bill will be left pending. Chair hears none, the bill will be left pending.